They were the men who fought in the shadows, warriors of silence and deception. In 1940, while Europe lay crushed beneath Hitler's iron fist, Britain faced an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Yet in the halls of the War Office, a new kind of warfare was being born. The idea came from Winston Churchill himself, who famously ordered, "Set Europe ablaze." Out of desperation came innovation, the birth of the British Commandos. These were not regular soldiers. They were handpicked from across the Commonwealth, men with nerves of steel, ready to strike deep behind enemy lines. Trained in the rugged landscapes of the Scottish Highlands, they endured brutal conditioning. Mountain climbing, demolitions, silent killing, and night navigation. All mastered under punishing weather and impossible odds. Their mission was simple but deadly: to raid, destroy, and vanish without a trace. By 1941, the first Commando units, No. 3 and No. 4 Commandos, had been forged, operating under the Combined Operations Headquarters. They were equipped with the latest tools of unconventional warfare: Fairbairn Sykes fighting knives, Steen submachine guns, and silent rubber dinghies for stealth landings. Their raids would be small, precise, and devastating. Psychological warfare aimed at the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe. The British public knew little of their existence. These men disappeared from barracks under vague orders, often leaving no word behind. Their missions, too, were cloaked in mystery. Many of their operations were never publicized, some never even officially recorded. But behind the secrecy lay a strategic truth. These commandos were testing the future of special operations. Their first real proving ground came in March 1941 with Operation Claymore. A strike against the remote Lofoten Islands off Norway's Arctic coast. German-occupied and seemingly insignificant, the islands hid a vital secret: fish oil factories producing glycerin, an essential ingredient for explosives. The mission's goal was twofold: cripple the enemy's production and gather intelligence on German shipping and codes. At dawn on March 4th, under the pale northern light, a flotilla of British destroyers approached the icy coastline. The sea was calm, deceptive. The commandos, around 500 strong, moved silently toward the shore. Within minutes, the island settlements of Stamsund and Svolvær were under attack. Explosions echoed through the fjords as storage tanks erupted in flames. Nearly 3,600 tons of oil were destroyed and over 200 German prisoners taken. But the true prize lay hidden in an office safe: German codebooks and rotor wheels from an Enigma machine. This was the unseen victory of Operation Claymore. Those materials, quietly delivered to Bletchley Park, would play a crucial role in decrypting German naval communications. For years, the connection between the Lofoten raid and the breaking of Enigma remained classified. The commandos themselves had no idea that their success would save countless lives in the Battle of the Atlantic. One participant, Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater of No. 3 Commando, later wrote, "We thought we had simply destroyed some factories. We didn't know we had struck a blow that would help win the war at sea." The secrecy was deliberate. The Germans never realized how compromised their communications had become, believing the loss of their code materials to be minor. This cloak of ignorance gave the Allies a crucial edge. Yet, for all its success, Operation Claymore was only the beginning. In London, Churchill and Admiral Lord Mountbatten, head of Combined Operations, studied the results. Could these small units achieve even greater feats? Perhaps cripple ports, destroy radar stations, or steal enemy technology? The Lofoten raid had proven the concept, but it had also revealed the peril. Many commandos barely escaped before Luftwaffe patrols arrived. Had they been caught, the operation would have been an international disaster. For the men who took part, the raid was a defining moment. They had seen how precision, surprise, and courage could turn the tide of war. They had fought in frozen silence and struck fear into the enemy. But they also knew the risks. Every mission would be a gamble between glory and oblivion, victory and disappearance. As Britain celebrated a rare success, plans were already underway for bolder, more dangerous strikes. Missions that would test not only tactics, but the very limits of human endurance. Some would succeed beyond imagination. Others would end in catastrophe and cover-up, their secrets buried in the archives for decades. In the shadows of the North Atlantic, the first chapter of the Commando legend was written in ice and fire. But even as the smoke cleared over the Lofoten Islands, One question lingered in the minds of those who commanded them. If such a small force could deal such a heavy blow, what else might they accomplish deep inside occupied Europe, where failure meant death or worse? The answer would come soon enough, and it would come on the blood-stained beaches of Dieppe. August 19, 1942, the French coast of Dieppe. In the pre-dawn darkness, more than 6,000 Allied troops, mostly Canadian, were approaching the pebble beaches under the cover of night. Operation Jubilee was meant to test German coastal defences, gather intelligence, and strike a symbolic blow against the occupying forces. Officially, it was a raid in force. Unofficially, it carried a hidden and far more dangerous objective. The public would be told that Dieppe was a rehearsal for the future invasion of France. Yet buried deep within the mission plan was a secret task, one that only a handful of British intelligence officers knew. A small team, operating under the cover of signal specialists, had orders to reach a German radar and communications station near the port. Their mission: to steal key components of German radar technology and, if possible, seize code materials that could unlock Luftwaffe transmissions. The operation began before dawn. At 3:47 a.m., naval gunfire shattered the quiet of the channel as landing craft moved toward the shore. But what awaited them was not surprise. It was slaughter. German defences were far stronger than Allied intelligence had reported. Heavy machine gun nests, fortified cliffs, and pre-sighted artillery positions cut down wave after wave of attackers. Within minutes, the beaches were transformed into chaos, smoke, fire, and the bodies of young men caught in the killing ground. For the main assault forces, the Royal Regiment of Canada, the Essex Scottish, and the South Saskatchewan Regiment, the battle was a nightmare. Tanks bogged down in the wet shingle, unable to move off the beach. Communications broke down almost immediately. Yet amidst the carnage, a small group pressed forward with quiet determination. The secret intelligence detachment, led by Lieutenant Colonel Jack Nissenthal, an RAF radar expert. Nissenthal's task was one of the war's most audacious: to infiltrate the German radar installation on the cliffs above Pourville and bring back its critical technology or intelligence. To protect the secrecy of his mission, the men guarding him, 12 Canadian soldiers from the South Saskatchewan Regiment, had orders that chilled the blood. If capture seemed imminent, they were to kill him. No one could be allowed to fall into German hands with such knowledge. Under relentless fire, Nissenthal and his escort crawled through barbed wire and across open ground, reaching the base of the radar site. They couldn't break inside, but Nissenthal examined the exterior, traced cables, and noted power feeds. Critical data that helped Allied scientists later replicate and counteract the German Freya radar system. He even managed to cut communication cables, temporarily blinding the local radar network. His escape back to the beach was a miracle. 10 of his 12 guards were killed covering his withdrawal. By mid-morning, the raid had collapsed. The Royal Navy's landing craft were shredded by coastal guns, and the surviving troops were forced to withdraw. Nearly 4,000 men were killed, wounded, or captured. From the air, RAF fighters tried desperately to provide cover, losing over 100 aircraft in the process. The beaches of Dieppe ran red, a testament to bravery and miscalculation alike. Yet amid the tragedy, the mystery of the mission's true purpose deepened. Official reports downplayed the radar reconnaissance element for decades. Nissenthal's name remained classified until long after the war. Even within Allied command circles, few knew that Operation Jubilee had served as a live experiment for future amphibious landings, not just a failure, but a crucible from which D-Day tactics would later emerge. After the war, declassified documents began to shed light on the radar mission. The intelligence gathered from Nissenthal's brief observations directly contributed to countermeasures that would later protect Allied bombers from German radar detection. It was a costly lesson in both technology and human sacrifice, one paid for in Canadian blood. But the controversy never faded. Some historians argue that Operation Jubilee was doomed from the start, a political maneuver by Churchill to appease Stalin's demand for a second front. Others believe it was a cover operation designed to conceal the real purpose: intelligence gathering under the guise of a full-scale raid. The loss of life remains one of the most painful chapters in Canadian military history, but the operation's shadow purpose continues to intrigue scholars and soldiers alike. In the aftermath, the surviving commandos and planners regrouped in silence. For them, Dieppe was not an end, but a grim beginning. The lessons learned would reshape every Allied landing that followed, from Sicily to Normandy. And for the secret world of commando and intelligence warfare, it underscored a truth. The line between success and catastrophe was as thin as a strand of wire. Dieppe beaches were littered with the wreckage of tanks, bodies, and unanswered questions. Why had intelligence underestimated German defenses? Who authorized such a reckless plan? And what else had been hidden beneath the official story? As the smoke cleared and the tide washed over the fallen, those questions lingered, unanswered, unspoken. But for the men who survived, there was little doubt. The war's most daring operations would continue, growing ever more secret, ever more dangerous, and the next would lead far from the beaches of France, deep into the burning sands of North Africa. By the summer of 1942, the Desert War in North Africa had become a brutal chess match of endurance and deception. The British Eighth Army faced Rommel's Afrika Korps across the vast, unforgiving sands of Libya and Egypt. Conventional warfare was grinding both sides into exhaustion. But in the shadows of that desert conflict, a different kind of war was unfolding. A secret war waged by small bands of men who traveled without insignia, struck without warning, and disappeared into the dunes. They called themselves the Long Range Desert Group, the LRDG. Formed in 1940 by Major Ralph Bagnold, the unit was composed of tough volunteers, many of them New Zealanders and Rhodesians, trained to survive in the most hostile environments on Earth. Using modified Chevrolet trucks fitted with extra fuel tanks, sand channels, and machine guns, they navigated hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, guided only by compasses and stars. They became the eyes and ears of the Allied command, and often, its knife in the dark. By late 1942, the LRDG had been joined by a new, more aggressive brotherhood, the Special Air Service, the SAS. Founded by David Sterling, the SAS specialized in destruction, not observation. Their goal was to infiltrate deep into enemy territory, plant explosives, and cripple German air power before it could reach the front lines. Sterling's men carried minimal supplies and maximum daring. As one veteran put it, "We lived by stealth and luck, mostly luck." Among their most daring operations was Operation Bigamy, launched in September 1942, a mission so secret that even many within Allied command had never heard of it. The plan was audacious: strike the Axis-held port of Benghazi, destroy key fuel depots, and escape before the enemy could respond. The operation would involve a combined force of SAS commandos and LRDG navigators, supported by the special boat section arriving by sea. It was to be a decisive blow to Rommel's supply chain. But the desert has a way of turning bold plans into tragedies. The convoy, over 50 vehicles, set out from Kufra Oasis under Sterling's command. The journey covered more than 1,000 kilometers of open desert, a place where heat could melt metal and sandstorms could erase entire tracks within minutes. To maintain secrecy, radio silence was absolute. They traveled by night, resting under camouflage nets by day, drinking rationed water warmed by the sun. The psychological toll was immense. Each man knew that if the trucks failed, there would be no rescue, only endless sand. After weeks of grueling travel, disaster struck. German reconnaissance aircraft spotted the column near the coast. Within hours, Luftwaffe bombers descended, strafing the desert with machine gun fire and high explosives. Several vehicles were destroyed. The rest scattered in chaos. Communication was lost. The mission was aborted. Sterling ordered a retreat that would turn into a nightmare of confusion and endurance. Only a fraction of the men made it back to Allied lines. Many vanished without a trace. Years later, in the 1950s, a group of explorers stumbled upon rusted truck frames half buried in sand, relics of that doomed mission. Inside, they found faded British insignia, spent shell casings, and personal items. A broken watch, a torn field notebook, a dented water canteen. The fate of several SAS troopers remains unknown to this day. The desert, it seems, had swallowed them whole. For decades, the official reports of Operation Bigamy remained sparse. Vague references to heavy losses due to enemy air activity. But recently uncovered documents suggest there may have been more to the story. Some historians now believe that the convoy's location was compromised not by accident, but by betrayal. Rumors persist that Axis intelligence had been tipped off through intercepted radio traffic, or even a double agent within Allied ranks. If true, It would mean that one of the most daring raids of the war was doomed before it even began. Sacrificed in the silent war of espionage that ran beneath the sand, Sterling himself was later captured in another operation, spending the rest of the war in a German prison. But his legacy endured. The SAS would rise from the desert's ashes to become one of the most formidable special forces in history. One survivor of the LRDG later wrote in his diary, "The desert has no mercy, no memory. Men vanish here, and even their shadows are erased." It was a fitting epitaph for the comrades lost to the sands of Libya, men whose courage remained unrecognized, whose mission was buried in secrecy. Operation Bigamy never achieved its tactical goal, but its legend shaped the very ethos of special operations. Daring beyond reason, silence beyond death. In the endless dunes, the war's most mysterious chapter was written not in victory, but in disappearance. And as the desert winds covered the wrecks and bones of the fallen, new plans were already forming back in London. Plans that would send another group of commandos into the heart of occupied France on a mission so audacious it would defy all logic and expectation. By early 1942, the war in Europe had reached a stalemate of steel and attrition. Hitler's Atlantic Wall stretched across the western coast of France, a fortress of concrete, artillery, and anti-ship defences that guarded the occupied continent from Allied invasion. Yet, hidden within these fortifications was a single weak point, a target so vital it could cripple the German Navy in one decisive strike: the massive dry dock at Saint-Nazaire. Known as the Normandy Dock, it was the only facility on the Atlantic coast capable of servicing the German battleship Tirpitz, the most powerful warship in Europe. If the dock were destroyed, the Tirpitz would be forced to return to home waters, removing a deadly threat to Allied convoys in the Atlantic. The plan to destroy it, Operation Chariot, would become one of the most daring and secretive commando raids of the Second World War. It began with a simple yet suicidal idea. Ram a ship loaded with explosives into the dock gates and detonate it after the commandos had escaped. The vessel chosen for this impossible task was HMS Campbelltown, an old American destroyer transferred under the Lend-Lease agreement and heavily modified to resemble a German Moa-class torpedo boat. Her bow was packed with over 4 tons of delayed action explosives, disguised under layers of concrete and steel. In the early hours of March 28, 1942, Campbelltown and her escort of small gunboats slipped out from Falmouth, Cornwall. On board were 601 men, Royal Navy sailors and British commandos from No. 2 Commando, led by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman. Their mission was a one-way ticket into history. They were told the odds of survival were minimal. Newman addressed his men before departure. "You've got a tough job ahead of you, but you're the right men to do it. Good luck, and we'll see it through." As dawn approached, the raiding force raced up the Loire estuary under German fire. The Campbelltown flew a false German flag to buy precious moments of confusion, but as searchlights caught her hull, the deception shattered. Flak guns erupted from both banks, lighting the night with streams of tracers. The Campbelltown's helmsman, Lieutenant Sam Beatty, stayed at the wheel as bullets tore through the bridge. At 1:34 a.m., she slammed into the dock gates at full speed, embedding herself deep into the structure, exactly where the explosives had been placed. The commandos leapt ashore into chaos. Under withering machine gun fire, they began planting demolition charges on pumping stations, fuel depots, and dock machinery. Every second counted. The tide was falling, and German reinforcements were closing in. Newman's men fought through the narrow dockside streets, outnumbered and outgunned. One commando, Lieutenant Bill Savage, manned a Lewis gun on an exposed gangway, holding off an entire German platoon before being killed at his post. His bravery would later earn him a posthumous Victoria Cross. After nearly an hour of fighting, Newman realized escape was impossible. The motor launchers meant to retrieve them had been destroyed or forced to withdraw under fire. With ammunition running low, the surviving commandos attempted to fight their way out of the port. Some made it as far as the outskirts before being surrounded and captured. Newman, defiant even in surrender, reportedly told his German captors, "If you find the damage to your dock isn't too severe, you can always try to put your battleships in there." Unbeknownst to both sides, the heart of the operation was still ticking. Hours later, at noon on March 28th, the explosives hidden in Campbelltown's bow detonated with a thunderous roar. The blast obliterated the dock gates, sent steel debris flying hundreds of meters, and killed over 300 German personnel inspecting the captured ship. The Normandy dock was rendered useless for the rest of the war. Tirpitz would never again threaten Allied shipping from the Atlantic. The human cost, however, was devastating. Of the 611 men who set out, 169 were killed and 215 taken prisoner. Yet their sacrifice achieved a strategic victory of immense importance, and one that would remain shrouded in secrecy for years. The Germans initially believed the destruction was caused by a bombing raid. It took them days to realize that the Campbelltown itself had been the weapon. The precision, courage, and deception of Operation Chariot stunned even the German command. For those who survived, captivity in German camps brought years of hardship. But the memory of that night burned bright. Charles Newman later wrote, "We had no illusions. We went to Saint-Nazaire to do a job that needed doing. And by God, we did it." The raid became known as the greatest raid of all, a benchmark for every special operation that followed. But beneath the official history lies a quieter mystery. The fate of those commandos who never returned and whose names were never recorded. In the years after the war, French fishermen occasionally recovered equipment, weapons, and even dog tags buried along the Loire. Some suggested that not all who vanished died in the blast, that a few may have slipped into the countryside, aided by the French resistance, and disappeared into the shadows of occupied France. Whether true or legend, the story of Operation Chariot carries an enduring aura of secrecy and sacrifice. The Saint-Nazaire raid proved that courage could strike harder than firepower, that a handful of men could change the course of naval warfare. But it also left a haunting question, echoing through the ranks of Allied command. If this was possible, what else could be achieved by stealth and deception? The answer would come months later, in another operation so secret that its full story would remain buried for decades. An operation carried out in occupied Italy, beneath the surface of the sea. Italy, 1943. The tide of war had shifted, yet the Mediterranean still burned with conflict. After the Allied invasion of Sicily and the fall of Mussolini, German forces poured south to fortify the Italian peninsula. But beneath the waves, a different kind of battle raged. One fought not by fleets or armies, but by a handful of men armed with stealth, courage, and ingenuity. They were the underwater commandos, the men of the British Royal Navy's Special Boat Section, SBS, and the Italian Decima Flottiglia, MAS, rival pioneers of a new kind of warfare. Their missions were silent, their weapons unorthodox. They used human torpedoes, submersible crafts, and explosive limpet mines to cripple ships in harbors too heavily defended for traditional attack. These were the ghosts of the sea, invisible, lethal, and often forgotten. One of the most audacious of these missions was Operation Principle. Executed in January 1943 against the Axis-held port of Palermo in Sicily, its objective was to destroy enemy shipping in one of the most heavily defended harbors in the Mediterranean. The assault would be carried out by a small team of SBS divers using chariots, manned torpedoes codenamed Mark II. These slow, two-man submersibles could carry divers to their targets in total darkness, detach explosive warheads, and slip away undetected. The men chosen for the mission were hand-picked veterans of underwater sabotage, Lieutenant Tony Eldridge, Sub-Lieutenant William "Bill" Smith, and Petty Officer Charles Fuller among them. Their operation was launched from the submarine HMS Trooper, which surfaced under cover of night off Palermo's harbour. The divers slipped into the freezing water, each man mounted on a torpedo no larger than a motorcycle, navigating through the blackness toward the enemy fleet. Inside the harbour, Axis ships loomed in silhouette against dim lights. Patrol boats prowled the waters, searchlights cutting the waves. The chariot teams moved with agonizing slowness, avoiding detection by sinking to the seabed whenever enemy craft passed overhead. They were equipped with nothing but oxygen rebreathers, compasses, and their courage. After hours of painstaking progress, the divers reached their targets, a collection of Axis supply ships, oil tankers, and a German destroyer. Working in total silence, they attached limpet mines and explosive warheads beneath the hulls. Each charge was set to detonate hours later, giving them time to escape. But the sea had other plans. Currents tore at them, exhaustion set in, and one chariot malfunctioned. Fuller's oxygen supply nearly failed. forcing him to surface dangerously close to an enemy sentry post. By dawn, the harbour erupted in fire. Massive explosions tore through the anchored ships, lighting the morning sky with flames visible miles away. Several vessels were sunk outright, and others were crippled beyond repair. The port was thrown into chaos. Its defences scrambled to find an enemy that had already vanished beneath the waves. But the escape did not go as planned. Some of the British divers were captured after surfacing far from their submarine rendezvous. Interrogated by Italian authorities, they gave nothing away. In a twist of fate, their captors were members of Italy's own naval sabotage unit. Men who, just months earlier, had carried out a nearly identical operation against the British fleet in Alexandria. There was a grim, mutual respect between these undersea warriors. One Italian officer reportedly said to his British prisoner, "If you were Italian, I would decorate you." Operation Principle was officially classified as a limited success. Only a fraction of the planned targets were destroyed, and several men were lost. Yet the psychological impact on Axis Command was immense. From that day forward, German and Italian port defences were forced to allocate vast resources to underwater protection, diverting manpower from the front lines. The unseen war of divers and commandos had shifted the balance of power beneath the waves. The men of the SBS continued their work throughout the Italian campaign, conducting covert raids along the coast and sabotaging bridges, harbours and rail lines. Few of their missions were ever documented in full. Many of their reports were stamped secret and buried in naval archives, only to be declassified decades later. Even today, portions remain redacted. Details of specific targets, names of captured operatives, and the fate of those who never returned. Among the missing was Lieutenant Eldridge's team. Their last known signal came from the depths of Palermo Bay. When divers explored the harbour years later, they discovered the rusted remains of a Mark II chariot wedged under a sunken merchant vessel, its warhead missing. To this day, no one knows whether it exploded as planned or was recovered by enemy divers. The mystery of that missing warhead remains one of the sea's cold secrets. Operation Principle may not have made newspaper headlines like the great naval battles, but it proved something far greater, that courage could exist in silence and victory could come from the unseen. The legacy of those divers inspired modern special forces, from the SBS to the Navy SEALs, whose underwater tactics trace back to that perilous night in Palermo. As 1943 faded into 1944, the Allies prepared for the final phase of the war in Europe. Yet the quiet heroes of the sea had already written their legacy, a legacy of invisibility, sacrifice, and daring so extreme that only history's shadows could hold it. And as the Allies planned the invasion of Normandy, whispers began to surface about a final mission, a raid so mysterious that even the men who carried it out were erased from the record. By 1944, the tide of the Second World War had turned decisively. The Allies were preparing for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied France. Yet even as vast armies assembled in southern England, a parallel war continued in the shadows. The Commando units, forged in secrecy and honed by failure and triumph alike, were about to undertake some of their most perilous and least documented missions. These final operations, carried out in occupied Europe in the months leading up to D-Day, would vanish almost entirely from official history. One such mission remains known only through fragments of declassified reports and whispered recollections. Operation Crackers, a covert raid along the Norwegian coast in early 1944. It involved a small detachment from No. 12 Commando and the Royal Norwegian Navy. Their objective was to reconnoitre enemy radar installations and gather intelligence on coastal defences crucial to the upcoming invasion of Western Europe. It was supposed to be a routine surveillance mission. It became something far stranger, an operation that seemingly disappeared into thin air. The team of 8 commandos embarked from the Shetland Islands aboard a Norwegian fishing trawler, blending with local maritime traffic. Their destination, the windswept fjords near Flatoy, an area thick with German listening posts. Armed with silenced Sten guns, demolition charges, and forged papers, they planned to go ashore, photograph enemy emplacements, and escape within 48 hours. But contact with the trawler was lost on the second night. Radio transmissions ceased. For weeks, British naval intelligence waited for a signal that never came. When the storm season passed and a reconnaissance aircraft was sent to the region, All it found was the wreckage of a small vessel washed up on a remote beach. There were no bodies, no survivors, and no clues. Locals reported seeing distant explosions at sea that same week, but whether from German patrols or sabotage gone wrong, no one could say. Operation Crackers was quietly marked "Mission Failed" and buried in the archives of the Special Operations Executive, SOE. For decades, it would remain classified. Some historians later uncovered hints that the commandos had in fact made landfall and completed their reconnaissance, but were betrayed during exfiltration by a local collaborator. Norwegian resistance files contain notes about British ghosts who appeared near Flatøy, stealing food and hiding in the forests before vanishing entirely. In 1962, hikers discovered rusted British weapons and fragments of radio equipment buried beneath moss and stone. The discovery reignited questions that had long lain dormant. Who were these men? And what had they really accomplished? Operation Crackers was not unique in its obscurity. Across occupied Europe in the final year of the war, countless small-scale commando raids took place. Many unrecorded, some so secret that even the participants' families were never told the truth. These missions gathered intelligence on beach fortifications, sabotaged rail lines, and rescued downed Allied airmen. They formed the invisible scaffolding upon which D-Day itself was built. Without them, the Allies would have been blind. But in the brutal economy of wartime secrecy, recognition was a luxury. Success was measured not by medals, but by silence. One Royal Marine Commando later reflected, "We didn't fight for glory. We fought so that the world could keep turning without ever knowing what we did." That statement, unearthed in a post-war interview, encapsulates the quiet tragedy of the men whose stories never reached the history books. After the war, as Europe rebuilt and official narratives hardened, the shadow operations faded from memory. Some records were lost in the fires of bureaucracy, others were deliberately destroyed. It wasn't until the late 1970s, when government documents began to be declassified under the Public Records Act, that researchers pieced together fragments of these hidden raids. Even then, entire missions, names, dates, units, remained redacted. Some speculated that a few operations had strayed into neutral or politically sensitive territories, their exposure too dangerous for Cold War diplomacy. The legacy of these lost commandos endures not in monuments, but in mystery. Their raids, though forgotten by most, shaped the very doctrine of modern special operations. From the British SAS to the American Navy SEALs, their lineage can be traced to these men who risked everything in silence. They proved that small, precise actions could alter the course of global war, and that courage does not always survive in memory. In one of the final reports filed by Combined Operations in May 1945, a single line stands out amid the bureaucratic language. Several teams unaccounted for, presumed missing during transit or extraction. No further explanation was ever given. Their names were never listed, their stories never told. And so, as historians sift through the fading pages of classified wartime files, they continue to uncover glimpses of a hidden war, one fought not in grand battles, but in the spaces between them. The commandos who carried out these missions did so without recognition, without promise of return, and without the expectation of remembrance. Their courage lies buried not in the ground, but in the silence of history itself. The story of the 5 most daring commando raids, hidden from history, is more than a tale of explosions and victories. It is a testament to the forgotten, to those who fought unseen, who vanished without fanfare, and whose bravery changed the course of a world that never knew their names.